There's no doubt that the Russians are interfering, and of course they would, because the stakes for Putin in this American election are huge, much bigger than in 2016 or 2020. He's in a quagmire in Ukraine, and the only way out of it is if he gets Donald Trump and the Republicans elected in America and they cut off aid to Kyiv.
Now, the front page of the Times reveals that Polish authorities think the Russians have been rehearsing an attack that could bring down a transatlantic jet. Chris Steele ran the Russia desk at MI6. You can speak to Chris now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Do you think the Polish authorities are right?
Absolutely. And it's not just the Polish authorities that have made this claim. In fact, the German head of security service did so recently as well. And in fact, when our own MI5 director, Ken McCallum, made a speech recently, said something very similar. And there's a pattern emerging here, which is that Russia has taken the gloves off, really, and is now involved in not just espionage and cyber operations against the UK and other NATO countries, but what we call in the business kinetic operations. And that would include incendiary devices, arson, sabotage, and assassination. And that's extremely worrying.
And what is it about this particular these particular incidents that have happened, for example, in the UK? Are there particular hallmarks? Is there something that makes people who know about this stuff think that it could be Russia?
There's clearly intelligence out there that points to Russia. Otherwise, the likes of the head of the German security service would not make such a claim. We haven't seen that intelligence yet, presumably because it will play in with prosecutions and so on. I think you're aware that in Poland, I think somebody has already been arrested in connection with this particular operation. So I'm not in much doubt that it's the Russians, and the Western security services are clear that it is them. And of course, it represents a really serious escalation, I would argue, in the sort of operations that they've been prepared to conduct. Ever since 2022, Russia's regarded itself at war, not just with Ukraine, but also with NATO. And I think our leaders and others have not taken this seriously enough. The implications of it are really very concerning. We could have, for example, an aircraft downed in a sort of classic terrorist operation conducted by a state that has a permanent seat on the Security Council. It's quite an extraordinary turn-up.
I want to ask you about one other thing, and that's, of course, about the American election. You got embroiled in some controversy about a secret dossier you wrote about Donald Trump and Russian interference. Do you think the Russians are interfering in this election?
Russians are very clearly interfering in this election. There was an incident 2 weeks ago, I think, where something on X, which seems to be formerly Twitter, which seems to be their platform of choice now for their disinformation, which is interesting, in which there was a sort of post that went viral concerning Vice President candidate Tim Walz. And you may have seen that. I certainly did. Millions of people did see it. And it was an attempt to paint him as a paedophile, and it was proven to be a Russian operation. Similarly, with something called Tenet Media a couple of months ago, where the Russians had poured $10 million into a YouTube or a website, which was ostensibly being run by Trump supporters in America, was actually being financed and directed from Moscow. So I think there's no doubt that the Russians are interfering. And of course they would, because the stakes for Putin in this American election are huge, much bigger than in 2016 or 2020. He's in a quagmire in Ukraine, and the only way out of it is if he gets Donald Trump and the Republicans elected in America and they cut off aid to Kyiv.
Well, that's a lot. That's a lot to digest. Chris, thank you very much for talking to us. That's Chris Steele, who ran the Russia desk.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the State Department. I want to begin by thanking our friends and colleagues, Foreign Minister Cho, Defense Minister Kim, for their partnership, for their friendship, and for the very good discussions we had today. And as always, it's great to be with my friend, my colleague, Secretary Austin. One of the things that we emphasized today was a reaffirmation of the United States' ironclad commitment to the ROK security, and that includes through extended deterrence. That's especially important in light of the ongoing provocations coming from North Korea, including another ICBM launch just yesterday. We condemn it in the strongest terms. The latest launch of many and other provocative actions that it's taken. Flagrant violations all of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. All countries should be demanding that the DPRK cease these destabilizing actions. We are closely consulting with our partners and also with Japan. In fact, Foreign Minister Cho and I were on the phone early this morning with our Japanese counterpart, and we will be focusing, as always, on this in the days to come, including the actions we'll take in response. All of this reinforces why we have to remain focused on maintaining peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific and on the Korean Peninsula in particular, even as we work with European partners to respond to the DPRK's deepening security relationship with Russia. We now assess that there are some 10,000 North Korean soldiers in total in Russia. And the most recent information indicates that as many as 8,000 of those North Korean forces have been deployed to the Kursk region. We've not yet seen these troops deploy into combat against Ukrainian forces, but we would expect that to happen in the coming days. Russia has been training DPRK soldiers in artillery, UAVs, basic infantry operations, including trench clearing, indicating that they fully intend to use these forces in frontline operations. Should these troops engage in combat or combat support operations against Ukraine, they would become legitimate military targets. Now, one of the reasons that Russia is turning to these North Korean troops is that it's desperate. Putin has been throwing more and more Russians into a meat grinder of his own making in Ukraine. Now, he's turning to North Korean troops, and that is a clear sign of weakness. Russia's been suffering some 1,200 casualties a day in the east, more than at any other time during the war. And with the deployment of these North Korean troops to Russia and now to the front lines, this is the first time in 100 years that Russia's invited foreign troops into its country. Lloyd.
Mr. Cho.
Oh, Minister Cho, you're right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
First of all, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Secretaries Blinken and Austin for co-hosting the 6th ROC U.S. Foreign and Defense Ministers meeting today and warmly welcoming the Korean delegation. In this time of geopolitical transformation, where regional and global security threats are ever increasing, causing grave security landscape, our two nations' foreign and defense ministers have come together and discussed joint responses, which was an extremely meaningful and timely endeavor. In today's meeting, we addressed the Korean Peninsula matters, ways to strengthen the alliance, as well as regional and global issues by having comprehensive and in-depth discussions, based on which we agreed on a joint statement. The DPRK's troops dispatch included its military cooperation with Russia is a clear violation of the UN Security Council resolutions. Reaffirming this, we condemned it in the strongest language possible and called for an immediate stop to such dispatch and all other illegal military cooperation. The DPRK's troop dispatch will further prolong Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine and place not only the Korean Peninsula but also Europe's peace and security under a grave threat, a view that we shared. Going forward, based on close information sharing and coordination, as circumstances evolve, we agreed to take necessary measures accordingly. We reaffirmed the goal of complete denuclearization of the DPRK. Its ongoing illegal missile provocations and nuclear NWMD development were strongly condemned. Especially the DPRK's launch of a long-range missile yesterday was a grave violation of the UN Security Council resolutions and a threat to the Korean Peninsula and the world. To address the DPRK's habitual violations of the UN Security Council resolutions and ensure strong and effective enforcement of North Korean sanctions, we are resolved to continue our partnership with the international community.
Minister Kim, Foreign Minister Cho, it's great to have you with us here in Washington. We now assess that North Korea has sent around 10,000 of its soldiers to train in eastern Russia. And as Secretary of State pointed out earlier, our most recent information indicates that about 8,000 of those DPRK soldiers are now in the Kursk Oblast. Now, we've not yet seen these soldiers deploy into combat against Ukraine's forces, but we expect that these North Korean soldiers will join the fight against Ukraine in the coming days. Our assessment is that Putin's forces have trained these North Korean soldiers in artillery operations, UAV operations, and basic infantry operations, including trench clearing. The Kremlin has also provided these DPRK troops with Russian uniforms and equipment. And all of that strongly indicates that Russia intends to use these foreign forces in frontline operations in its war of choice against Ukraine. And make no mistake, if these North Korean troops engage in combat or combat support operations against Ukraine, they would make themselves legitimate military targets. So we are consulting closely with our allies and partners in other countries in the region on these reckless developments and on our response. As I discussed last week in Kyiv, Ukraine's military continues to perform admirably on the battlefield, and Putin's forces have suffered serious losses. In recent months, Ukrainian forces have caused more than 1,200 Russian casualties per day, more than at any other time during Putin's war. And by tin-cupping to North Korea for manpower, Putin is showing the world another clear sign of weakness. The Kremlin's North Korean gambit just underscores how badly Putin's war has gone.
Good afternoon. I am the Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Korea. First, I'd like to thank Secretary of State Blinken and Secretary of Defense Austin for hosting the raucous Foreign and Defense Ministerial and for your warm reception of the Korean delegation. On North Korea's ICBM launch yesterday, we denounced this with one voice and urged North Korea to abide by the UN Security Council resolutions. Also, on the escalating North Korean nuclear and missile threats, we agreed to continuously strengthen cooperation on deterrence and response. On North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia and illegal military cooperation with Russia, we denounced this with strong words and strongly urged the immediate withdrawal of North Korean troops. We have completed the joint guidelines in last July, and thus uplifting the raucous alliance into a nuclear-based alliance in name and in substance. We reconfirmed our common goal of the complete denuclearization of North Korea, and based on historic joint guidelines, we agreed to continuously strengthen the implementation of extended deterrence.